Used to think, if I were good enough, everything would fall into place. But then, one day, I stood in a meeting room and watched my boss erase everything I had built over 2.5 years with a single click. No warning. No compassion. They called my work trash. They said I was doing it wrong. But what they didn't realize was this. The day they pushed me out of the system was the very same day they cut off the lifeblood that kept their company alive. And me, I walked away not because I was defeated, but because I understood the truly talented never need to stay and beg for recognition. This is the story of a woman pushed to her breaking point and how she chose to take revenge with the only weapon toxic people can never possess: authentic value, true talent, and the calm strength of walking away at the right time. Chapter 1. The Erased Moment and the Call That Changed Everything. "This work is garbage," she shouted then. Without a hint of hesitation, dragged all my files straight into the trash bin on the screen, right in front of 15 colleagues in the meeting room. I just stood there, silent, watching my entire creative life vanish with a single click. Each file was a story, a brand I had spent weeks, months researching, understanding, nurturing. And now all that remained was a cold, empty, white space, projected on the giant screen. I don't remember exactly how I held back my tears. I just recall that the moment Bethany turned away with a smug smile, my phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I don't know why, but I didn't hesitate. I walked out of that meeting room, gripping my phone like my life depended on it. "Lucia, this is Diana Walsh from Cascade Brand Collective. We'd like to officially offer you the position of creative director, starting salary at $400,000 per year, and full autonomy over brand strategy." I stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might rip through my chest. She wasn't joking. $400,000, almost 3 times what I was earning at Meridian. But the number wasn't what left me breathless. It was the fact that they had been watching. They knew. They saw the real value in the very thing Bethany had just called trash. I walked back into the meeting room. The place was still dead silent, as if everyone had just witnessed a public execution. Bethany was rambling on about professional workflows, while the screen behind her remained blank, no trace of the work I had poured my heart into for over 2.5 years. I stood right there in the center of that room and looked her dead in the eye. "I have an announcement to make," I said, not loud, not trembling, but just firm enough to make every head turn. "I officially resign. Effective immediately." In that moment, I saw it clearly. Bethany's confusion, her face turning pale, as if someone had just slapped her across the face. She stammered, scrambling to regain control. "You can't just... This is a company meeting. There needs to be notice." "We still have handover procedures." I didn't respond. I simply gathered the last of my personal papers from the table, wrapped up my favorite pen, and walked out of that meeting room as if nothing in there had ever been meant to hold me back. The door closed behind me, leaving behind a company I once believed was my creative home. But in truth, all along, it had been nothing more than a factory mass-producing ideas, treating emotions as inconveniences, viewing brand storytelling as unnecessary fluff. Too unprofessional to be worth their time. And me, I was never the right fit. But what they didn't know was they had just deleted the only thing keeping their biggest clients from walking away. They thought they had crushed me, but in reality, they had just flung open the door to the strongest version of myself and handed me the keys to a brand new chapter of my life. A chapter I'm about to tell you right now. Chapter 2. The Illusion of a Door and the Collapse of Expectation. I still remember, it was a rainy September morning. Portland was foggy cold and held a strange sense of promise. I carried my portfolio bag heavy but filled with pride and stepped through the glass doors of Meridian Creative Studios, once hailed as the city's creative seedbed. The automatic doors opened like an invitation. Come step, gap into a world of passion and art. What I didn't know was, behind that door, there was no light waiting for me. only a cold, mechanical system ready to crush every spark of genuine creativity. Polished concrete floors, exposed brick walls, industrial lights dangling overhead. It looked like a movie set made for creatives. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is where I'll finally be free to soar. But the deeper I walked inside, the more something felt off. Designers sat motionless like machines, eyes glued to screens, fingers gliding across their mice like factory operators. No one sketched by hand. There were no scraps of paper, no mood boards, no bursts of inspiration or artwork pinned to the walls, only KPI charts, standardized templates, and ticking timers. That's when I met Bethany Voss. She appeared without warning, her smile sharp as a blade, her outfit tailored so meticulously it looked uncomfortable. Not a strand of her perfectly brushed blonde hair was out of place. Everything about Bethany was controlled, even her gaze. Lucia, I'm Bethany, your creative director. Let's get a few things straight from the beginning. We walked into her office, a space that bore not a single trace of creativity. Instead of idea boards, the walls were covered in productivity charts, planning calendars, and a bold slogan that read, "Punctuality is the pinnacle of creativity." She opened a thick binder, as if initiating me into some cult-like ritual. The title on the front read, Standardized Creative Operations Protocol. Here we don't make art, she said. We deliver solutions. Clients don't need visual poetry. They need clear logos, brochures delivered on deadline, and websites that convert. I sat there, hands still resting on my portfolio bag. Inside were projects I had poured my soul into for small clients. Graduation works my professors once called the fusion of design and humanity. But across from me was a different world entirely, one where emotional connection was seen as a waste of time, and creativity was nothing but a mass-produced commodity. As she flipped through sample documents, style guides, fixed color systems, default typefaces, I could almost hear the sound of a steel door slowly closing behind me. Every design the company produced looked the same. Restaurants, law firms, tech startups, all built on the same layout, just with different colors and names. I don't know how I nodded when the orientation ended. Maybe because I wasn't ready to admit I had walked into the wrong place. She smiled, shook my hand, and said, like a command, "Welcome to reality." And yes, she was right. Meridian wasn't a place where ideas became reality. It was a place where people became tools. I didn't realize then that, from that very moment, my journey would no longer be about finding my place in the creative industry. It would be about holding on to myself before I became completely erased. Chapter 3. The Control System. When creativity is caged. It took me less than a week to realize. This place had no need for a heart. We, the so-called designers, were really just technicians on an invisible assembly line where everything came pre-packaged. Every time we received a new project, I wasn't asked to brainstorm or sketch. I was handed a folder titled Standard Design Package, Industry XYZ. Inside a template logo default fonts, pre-approved brochure layouts. All we had to do was swap names, change colors, pick stock photos from the library, and send it off. I used to believe that creativity was a journey, that each brand was a unique story, waiting to be heard and understood. But here, everything was just a formula cloned and recycled. Bethany, dressed in wrinkle-free dresses and a smile colder than ice, walked around each morning like a prison warden. She never once asked, where did this idea come from? The only things she cared about were, did you input the code according to protocol? What phase is this design in on the timeline? Have you exceeded your allocated work hours? There was a large digital board mounted outside the meeting room, constantly updating how much time each person spent on a project. The number of minutes in client calls, the count of revisions. No different from a productivity monitor at a garment factory. I used to think the creative industry was where people lived for passion. But at Meridian, passion was measured by the hour. One lunch break, I sat alone in the office kitchen, opened my laptop, and began browsing through some sketch ideas. I wanted to try proposing a new approach for a potential client, a local coffee brand with 3 generations of artisanal roasting. In my head, ideas started to spark vintage typography, warm browns the feel of a misty Portland morning, and the image of a grandfather slowly stirring coffee like a sacred ritual. But just then, Bethany walked in. She glanced at my screen and frowned. "Lucia, we don't do art for art's sake here. Keep your personal emotions for your personal blog. Clients need results, not an emotional painting." Then she walked away like she'd just caught a child doing something foolish. I sat there empty. It wasn't her criticism I feared. It was the creeping fear that she might be right, that I was starting to trim away the soft edges of my thoughts just to fit the rigid mold Bethany had built. Motivational posters lined the hallways with slogans like "Optimize, don't romanticize," "Value, tries to speed, X discipline." Art is a tool, not a destination. And slowly, day by day, they began seeping into my subconscious, a daily reminder that here creativity came with a leash. I saw my colleagues grow silent. They no longer talked about design. They didn't ask each other, where did that idea come from? They just asked, which template did you use in every meeting? Bethany would present performance reports, growth charts on time, delivery rates, revision frequencies lower than industry average. She beamed as if these were the achievements of an innovative leader. But I knew deep down she didn't understand what clients truly wanted. She didn't see that a logo isn't just an image, it's the voice of a brand's soul. I started documenting everything. The empty meetings, the times I was cut off for trying to speak about the story behind a brand. The projects where I was forced to use templates I knew were wrong. I didn't even know why I was recording it all. Maybe to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that it wasn't wrong to still want to feel, to listen, to understand. And maybe, just maybe, one day everything they tried to force me to forget would become the strongest weapon I ever had. Chapter 4, Stories That Don't Fit the Template. I knew exactly what I was doing was against the rules. The company didn't ban creativity, they just banned creativity outside the system. Everything had to go through the framework, be approved, be warped into a mold that had existed since, I don't even know when. But I also knew one thing. If I still wanted to love this profession, I had to do it on my own terms. It all started with what seemed like a routine client meeting. Marcus Holloway, owner of a small craft brewery, came in to discuss a brand refresh. He was a man of few words, maybe even a bit gruff. But when I reviewed the internal meeting recording afterward, there was one moment that stopped me cold. A single sentence barely acknowledged my grandfather was a brewmaster in Germany before he moved to Oregon. Just that. But it made me pause. I don't know why, but I couldn't ignore it. I started digging into Portland's brewing history, into the wave of German immigrants after the war, into how traditional beer-making techniques were passed down across generations. I visited old bars in East Portland, talked to bartenders and shop owners who had lived their whole lives in the scent of hops and memory. I didn't do any of this during work hours. I didn't log any of it in company files. I used my personal notebook, stored everything on a private drive, password protected. I didn't want Bethany to know, not because I was afraid, but because I didn't want anyone touching this piece of truth. I designed Marcus's new logo based on everything I had felt a connection between past and present. A mark inspired by the classic elegance of old European beer labels infused with the earthy palette of Oregon's pine forests. The typography echoed post-war pub signage, but was clean enough to live in the digital age. I didn't run it by Bethany. I sent it straight to Marcus with a note, "I know your grandfather was the first to ferment this dream." I just tried to bring it back to where it belongs. The reply came in less than an hour. In 20 years, no one's ever understood my brand like this. I nearly cried reading those words. Just a few weeks later, Marcus came back. Sales were up. New customers were coming in. He asked me to design his full seasonal packaging line and brought a secondary contract worth $35,000. I said nothing to Bethany. In her eyes, I had simply completed a task on time. But deep down, I knew I had just proven that storytelling wasn't a waste of time. It was the only thing that gave a brand its soul. From that moment, I quietly began approaching other clients the same way. No one knew that in the evenings, I visited the tiny workshop of Elena Vasquez, our next client, a sustainable fashion designer whose brand had been template-ified. Her old logo was a leaf. The slogan was "Green is the new black." The website mint green stock images the same layout as every other eco-friendly brand out there. But when I spoke to Elena, she told me something that no creative brief ever mentioned, that her grandmother taught her how to embroider, that every stitch in her designs was a replica of traditional patterns from Guadalajara, each one symbolizing something: sacred prosperity, protection, rebirth. And I thought, this is the kind of thing Bethany dares to call not worth telling. I asked to visit her workshop. I photographed her hands as she embroidered, delicate fingers moving through the soft glow of filament bulbs. I asked her what each symbol meant, and I was stunned when she said, "This one, my grandma called the eye of protection. Once finished, she'd sew it into a newborn's clothes." I went back and built an entirely new campaign. No more leaf icons or tired slogans, but a story across generations, fashioned not just for sustainability, but for tradition, for sacred bonds to one's origin. The campaign launched the following month. Social media engagement rose 340%. 12 wholesale agencies reached out within 2 weeks, and I was invited to Elena's grandmother's 80th birthday, as if I were family. As I stood in that little house surrounded by candlelight and the laughter of 3 generations of women, a thought struck me. This is what Bethany's templates will never understand. A brand isn't a color palette, a font, or a tidy slogan. It's a story, a memory, a human heartbeat. From that point on, I began keeping a personal notebook. Inside were all the stories I'd collected from small clients, from off-the-record conversations, from the truths that would never make it into official contracts. I didn't know what I'd use it for back then. I just knew I was building a parallel world, one where sincerity was currency. And one day, that world would save me and bury everything fake Bethany had ever built. Chapter 5. The Underground Network and Silent Power. I never meant to build an underground network. All I ever wanted was to help my clients tell their stories properly. But the more I worked, the more I realized they didn't just need design. They needed to be heard. They needed someone to understand them far beyond the question, what color should the logo be? After Marcus and Elena, the personal messages began to roll in. "Lucia, are you free? I want to send you some new packaging ideas." "Lucia, I had a shareholder crisis today. I need urgent branding help." "Lucia, my grandmother just passed. I want to create a tribute collection." "You're the only one I trust to understand." I started taking calls during lunch breaks, answering texts after hours. Clients sent me family photos, life stories, dreams, all the things that never make it into a company brief. And I saved everything. Not in Meridian's CRM, but in a private file encrypted on my personal laptop, simply named Real Clients. Inside I kept birthday notes, family milestones, memory colors, meaningful keepsakes, fears they'd once confided in a side conversation over coffee, offhand remarks that carried brand-defining depth. I knew if Bethany ever found that file, she'd call it unprofessional, a breach of protocol, a misuse of company resources. But to me, it wasn't a database. It was a living map where every dot represented a real person, a beating heart that had chosen to trust me out of dozens of other designers. And then, something I didn't expect happened. They started referring me to others. Not through the company, not through contact forms. They shared my number. They told my story at birthday parties, local fairs, small business workshops. I got a message from an Italian restaurant owner. "Hi, Lucia. I'm Stefano, a friend of Marcus. He said you understand family and legacy. I want to speak with you, not the company." I said yes. Then came a young woman launching a candle shop inspired by the healing scents her grandmother used to make. Then a group of Korean Americans looking to rebrand their parents' corner store to honor the silent decades of hard work on foreign soil. No one came to me for a logo. They came for connection. Because they were told Lucia will listen. She won't treat you like a project. And when I finally paused to look back, I had worked with or was actively consulting over 30 clients. Not through Bethany, not through sales, just through trust. And I wasn't just creating design work. I was creating stories clients held close to their hearts, stories they shared with their children, their friends, their communities. But this quiet success also began to create fractures. Bethany said nothing at first. She just glanced at me sideways in meetings. Then, gradually, I was removed from certain client sessions. She said I seemed overloaded and should focus on core responsibilities. But I knew exactly what was happening. She was afraid of me standing out, afraid I was building something she couldn't control. Because at Meridian, success didn't come from creativity. It came from compliance. And I no longer complied. One Friday afternoon, an internal email arrived. Subject line: all client communications must go through project management, no direct contact. I sat in front of the screen reading that sentence, heart-sinking. And I knew the silent war had begun. Chapter 6. The Party, the Word Dad, and a Truth. I was never meant to know. I rarely attended company parties, partly because I hated pretending to be friendly with people I didn't trust, partly because I was never truly treated as one of them. But that year, everyone insisted I had to go. "Lucia, you're the reason we kept so many major clients this year. If you don't show up, the award ceremony will be a joke." I said nothing, but I went. That night I wore a simple black dress, stood near the buffet table holding a glass of red wine, like I actually belonged there. Soft jazz played under glittering lights, smiles, hollow congratulations, obligatory hugs. Everything looked beautiful. Beautiful, but empty. I was just about to leave when I heard a deep, authoritative male voice from across the room. "Bethany, darling, we need to talk about the company's creative direction." I froze. "Darling?" I turned, trying to look indifferent as I glanced toward the voice. A silver-haired man in a tailored suit was standing beside Bethany, the very woman I knew had no real friendships with anyone. He called her darling, and she didn't react. No awkwardness, no denial. Just a soft smile, like it was all completely normal. And then, "Dad, I've got everything under control." "Dad." I went numb. That man, none other than Trevor Ashford, founder of Meridian Creative Studios, and Bethany was his daughter-in-law. All the pieces shattered and rearranged in my mind. Every question that had haunted me over the past 2.5 years suddenly answered. Why was she appointed creative director at 30 with no remarkable portfolio? Why could she shut down ideas with a single email? Why was she never held accountable even when projects failed or clients walked away? Because she never had to prove herself. She married right. She was family. I turned away, trying to swallow the wave rising in my throat. Every compliment she ever received, every time she took credit for my work, every report that praised the team without naming me. It all made sense now. I hadn't lost. I was never allowed to win. And what hurt the most was how long I had spent convincing myself, maybe I'm just not good enough. I blamed myself. I worked overtime. I learned new software. I read books on branding. I pushed myself to exhaustion, chasing a position I was never meant to reach, because that seat had already been reserved. I left the party less than 30 minutes later, but my heart wasn't confused anymore. I saw it clearly. This was no longer a story about creativity. It was a power game, A legacy system, old rigid, propping up a woman who pretended to lead, but was really just a favored pawn. And I, the outsider, the one without family or influence, was a threat. I finally understood why she hated me, not because I was wrong, but because I made her feel like she was losing, even though she was born to win. Chapter 7. When the loser grabs power, the game turns dirty. After that fateful party, I had no doubts left. I knew I was sitting in the hot seat, not because I was weak, but because I was too strong. I was living proof of Bethany's incompetence. I generated revenue. Clients loved me. I climbed without favors or handouts. I was everything she couldn't control, and for someone like Bethany, control is everything. The campaign to push me out began the very next week. First came the accidental scheduling overlaps. I was assigned 2 major projects at once. Lunar New Year packaging for Marcus's craft beer brand, requiring research into Vietnamese German heritage. Elena's spring fashion collection inspired by traditional Mexican festivals. These 2 should have been staggered, but Bethany and her flat weather reporter tone gave them the same deadline. We need to keep timelines synced. Both clients want a Q1 launch. You can manage, right? I looked at the cultural research folders, each one as deep as a waterfall. Done properly, I would need at least 3 weeks per project. At their pace, I'd have to cut corners, recycle ideas, paste together, cultures like a sloppy collage. And I refused to butcher the work, so I worked. Days, nights. I gave up my weekend to interview traditional embroidery artisans in Mexico to translate ancient spring ritual documentation. I sat in Marcus's kitchen, listening to stories about how he built his brewery from his father's old stove. I knew Bethany hoped I'd crumble, but I delivered, on time, and the clients beamed like they'd just been handed a piece of forgotten legacy. I thought it was over. I was wrong. Her next move was subtler approval delays. After I submitted my first designs, Bethany went quiet. No feedback, no revisions, no confirmation. She let them sit for 5 days. On day 6, she sent a single email: client needs revisions ASAP. Deadline tomorrow. Tomorrow I opened the folder. No instructions, no client notes, no red lines. Just a line: deliver by 4 p.m. tomorrow. I went still. This wasn't management. This was time-based sabotage. I did it, of course. Pulled an all-nighter. Delivered at 3:58 p.m. But in the next team meeting, she said, Lucia seems a bit behind schedule. We'll need to redistribute her workload for efficiency. I started documenting everything. Every delayed email, every vague response, every meeting I was cut from, only to be told it was due to a conflict. And then she played her boldest card. She cut me off from research. She told me that clients wanted a more streamlined process and preferred to receive solutions directly from the company. I was no longer allowed direct contact. All client input would come through the coordination team. On the surface, it sounded efficient, until I saw the brief. It was stripped down to nothing. No brand foundation, no meeting transcripts, no discovery questions, just an Excel sheet with headers like brand name, primary color palette, campaign goal, deadline. And me, I was told a good designer doesn't need that much data. Just be creative. That was when I understood Bethany didn't want me to fail because of talent. She wanted me to fail due to lack of information. Because in her eyes, measurable failure is easier to justify than emotional relevance. What she didn't know was that I had prepared for this. I didn't need her system to understand clients. I had off-record connections, conversations, stories, memory logs she could never touch. She was playing a game I understood better than she did. But I didn't fight back. I didn't yell. I didn't file complaints. I didn't expose her. I did something else. I let her continue. I let her create the cracks. I let her write the indictment with her own hand. I let her believe she was winning. Because I knew. The more confident she became, the more she'd expose herself. And soon enough, she'd be the one to destroy everything she thought she built. Chapter 8. The company-wide trap and the click. that changed everything that morning. The office had a strange scent. Not coffee, not fresh ink, but the scent of calculation. I stepped in, and everyone's eyes instinctively avoided mine. Colleagues whispered more softly. Someone pursed their lips. Someone tapped their desk with unnecessary urgency. Then a new meeting invite landed in my inbox. Creative team assembly. 2 under PM today. Topic: professional standards and portfolio quality review. I didn't need to ask. I knew exactly what this was. My name was on the chopping block. Bethany never titled meetings like that unless she was about to publicly execute someone. I spent the whole morning preparing, not to defend myself, but to back everything up. Every design, every cultural research file, every thank you note from clients, every message thread. I uploaded them to 3 separate cloud platforms, sent one to my personal email, stored another on a hard drive, and the final copy on a USB I wore around my neck. I didn't know exactly what would happen in that meeting, but I knew one thing: I would not walk in empty-handed. At 2 p.m., sharp 15 people walked into the conference room. The entire creative team, project managers, a few people from accounting and marketing, and Trevor, the founder, sat silently at the far end of the table. Bethany stood up front, laptop connected to the projector. Her eyes sparkled, dangerous and gleaming. Today, she began, we'll be reviewing a few examples that cross the boundary of professionalism and why becoming too emotionally invested in client work can damage the creative process. No one spoke, but everyone knew. This wasn't a learning session, it was a trial, and I was the accused. Bethany opened the first folder. Project 001, Marcus Holloway Craft Beer. On the screen appeared photos I'd taken with Marcus's grandfather, sketches of logos inspired by immigrant memories, font notes referencing German signage from 1947, snippets from our interview about his first homebrewed batch in his father's garage. This, Bethany said, is a clear example of overstepping a designer's role. Spending weeks on a client's family history isn't just inefficient, it sets unrealistic expectations. She moved to the next. Project 002, Elena Vasquez. Photos of Elena's hands embroidering. Shots of her workshop. Descriptions of the spiritual symbols in traditional Mexican patterns. This isn't design, she continued, voice steady. It's ethnography. And this company is not a cultural museum. This is time-consuming and outside our approved professional scope. Silence. No one defended me. No one objected. No one met my eyes. I saw Sarah, my closest colleague, staring at her lap hands clenched under the table. She knew this was wrong, but she also knew speaking up now would be career suicide. Bethany returned to the screen. She selected the entire folder marked with my name. Dozens of projects, hundreds of hours of work. I'm not saying she didn't work hard, but effort in the wrong place only weakens the system. And so, she paused, looked straight at me. I'll be deleting this content from our official system. It does not meet company standards. And then, she clicked. One click. The screen went white. The entire room sank into silence. But not just any silence. The kind that only falls when someone has done something irrevocable. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because right then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Caller ID Cascade Brand Collective. I stood up. Excuse me, I need to take this. It might change everything. Bethany raised an eyebrow, clearly annoyed her public punishment had been interrupted. I walked out into the hallway, phone to my ear, but I could still hear her voice from the room behind me. From now on, everyone needs to understand the boundaries of their role. We don't make friends with clients. We deliver services. I heard every word. The clearer they became, the more I smiled. Because on the other end of the line was a voice I'd never forget, Lucia. We know you're the true force behind the lasting success of several brands at Meridian these past 2 years. We've waited long enough. It's time for you to shine with real authority. Chapter 9. I wasn't fired. I chose to walk away. When I returned to the meeting room, the energy had shifted. No one looked at Bethany the same way anymore. Maybe it was the moment she clicked delete without hesitation. Maybe it was because everyone realized they could be next. I stood at the door watching them all. The screen behind her was blank. The place where hundreds of hours of my work had once been displayed was now a cold, white void. She was still talking, still rambling about process efficiency, professional standards. I stepped forward into the center of the room, calm but deliberate. Actually, I have an announcement to make. She froze. Everyone turned to look at me. I smiled. I'm officially resigning. Effective immediately. The air left the room. Bethany's eyes widened. Then she laughed a dry, contemptuous laugh. You can't just walk out in the middle of a meeting. There's protocol HR procedures. I cut in gently. You just deleted all of my work in front of 15 employees. If someone violated protocol today, it wasn't me. I turned to the table, picked up my pen, my personal documents, and the USB around my neck. All copies are secure. I'm not foolish enough to keep only one like you assumed. Bethany's face began to change. She looked around, searching for an ally, but no one spoke. I continued. I've accepted a role as creative director at Cascade Brand Collective. They know I'm the one who built the storytelling foundation that kept Meridian's clients loyal. They evaluate my work based on real outcomes, not personal bias. Bethany flushed red, voice sharp. You don't have the authority to walk away like this. I haven't approved it. I turned to Trevor, her father-in-law, the company's founder, still seated in the corner, silent since the meeting began. Mr. Trevor, I think. We both know what's really happening here. His eyes met mine for a brief moment, just enough for me to see it. He knew. He had known all along. I'll submit my formal resignation in writing today, and today will be my last day at Meridian. I walked out of the room, leaving behind a circle of stunned faces and a Bethany so shaken her expression barely held together. But I didn't leave just yet. I turned back, pausing at the doorway. I looked directly at Madison, the new intern Bethany had lined up to replace me. Good luck, Madison. You're not the problem. The problem is, you've been placed into a role I once thought had a fair shot. Then I looked at my former team. I hope what happened today shows you something. Silence in the face of injustice doesn't protect you. It just extends the time it takes to suffocate you. The room stayed silent. Even Sarah, the most cautious of them all, gave me a small nod. A nod full of gratitude and understanding. And then I turned. I walked away. Folder in hand, USB around my neck, and my head held high not as someone leaving a company, but as someone finally walking out of a prison. Chapter 10. When the truly talented walk away, everything else begins to fall apart. My first week at Cascade Brand Collective felt like breathing for the first time after years of suffocation. No KPI boards on the walls, no mandatory templates, no eyes monitoring my every minute, doubting my every move, just trust, and a space where creativity was truly allowed to exist. Diana, the CEO, greeted me with a firm handshake and a sentence I'll never forget. We didn't hire you to follow instructions. We hired you to lead. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, sat at my new desk, opened my laptop, and finally breathed. While I began my first project at Cascade, the place I had left behind began to shake. News of my resignation spread faster than any press release. Within 48 hours of my departure, 5 former clients had reached out to me directly. Marcus always, calm-called with rare urgency in his voice. Lucia, they said, you're gone. I don't know if I want to continue with Meridian. We're entering the next phase of the beer label project, and I don't trust anyone else to understand my family's story the way you did. Elena sent a message, simple but full of meaning. If you're no longer there, I have no reason to stay either. I didn't lure anyone. I didn't need to. Because when you work with sincerity, people follow you without needing an invitation. And then everything I had quietly expected began to unfold. Bethany reassigned all of my clients to Madison Rivers, the young intern she once hyped as the fresh talent who would bring a new era. But Madison wasn't to blame. She simply wasn't equipped to handle brands built on depth culture and emotional nuance. In her first meeting with Marcus, she stumbled when asked about the symbolism in the logo. She didn't know the history of immigration. She didn't know the brand's development timeline. She didn't understand why the hop tree image was offset to the left, because that's where Marcus's grandfather once kept his roasting table. She suggested using stock photos of her craft beer, the kind you could download for free from any image bank. Marcus later told me she's nice, but she doesn't understand. And I don't want to start over when I once had someone who understood me from the very first sentence. I kept working at Cascade. In just 3 weeks, I helped a green tech startup reposition their story from sustainable product to redefining the future through inspired science. The launch campaign made waves instantly. $2.3 million raised in just 6 weeks. Cascade began to grow, and Meridian began to crumble. Longtime clients left without a word. New prospects refused to sign, citing rumors of major changes in the creative team. And Madison resigned after 4 months. She gave no formal reason, just left a single line in her farewell email, one that someone later forwarded to me. I can't fill a space that was built from genuine care and real respect for clients. Bethany kept trying to salvage the wreckage. She slashed pricing, cold called former clients, promised 20% off, then 30%, then free consultations. But when clients asked basic questions like, who will handle our brand storytelling now? Do you even understand how my family has evolved since 1945? Bethany froze. Because what she had erased were things that couldn't be recreated through a template. She didn't lose clients because they liked Lucia. She lost them because she never understood them. And then I heard Trevor, her father-in-law, began holding private meetings with investors. They didn't say much, just asked one question. Why did someone accused of crossing professional boundaries walk away with the entire client base? No one had an answer, but I knew I didn't need to answer anymore. She was facing the consequences herself, one client at a time, one contract at a time, one revenue line at a time. Follow the path I once walked. Chapter 11. A late offer and the most beautiful. No, I've ever said I was sitting at my usual coffee shop, adjusting the mood board for a new campaign when the phone rang. An unknown number, but the voice achingly familiar. Lucia, it's me, Trevor Ashford. My fingers paused on the keyboard. Silence. A slow breath. Then I replied calmly, yes, I'm listening. His voice no longer carried the authority of a founder. It sagged the voice of a man holding a crumbling empire in his hands. I'll be direct. We need you back. Meridian needs you. I said nothing. He continued, voice quickening, as if afraid I'd hang up any second. We're prepared to offer you full creative director authority, complete control over direction, content strategy, and the design team, double your current salary at Cascade, and we're open to equity negotiation if you wish. I let out a small laugh. Not out of joy, but because life really knows how to write its own scripts. You're offering me the same seat your daughter-in-law once used to delete all my work in front of the entire company, called it garbage, and dared me to prove myself again. Silence on the other end. I imagined Trevor running his hand through his hair, sweating. Maybe for the first time in his career, realizing that backing the wrong person can topple an entire empire. Lucia, he said softer now. Bethany's no longer with the company. I lifted my head. She was removed from the creative director role in last month's board restructuring. The official reason, poor emotional leadership abuse of power and damage to core client relationships. I exhaled. Not in triumph, but in quiet recognition, the way you acknowledge autumn's arrival after a long summer. I didn't need to ask anything else. I simply replied, "No pride in my voice, no venom, just clarity. I appreciate the offer. But I'm finally in a place where I've been respected since day one, not just when everything starts falling apart." And I hung up. No spotlight, no applause. Just me, and a peace that reached deep into my bones. I didn't need to return to win, because I had already won the moment I walked away, and they couldn't hold on to anything I left behind. Bethany thought deleting files would erase me, but what she didn't know, I'm not defined by a company, or a hard drive, or a logo. I am the relationship. I am the memory etched in clients' hearts. I am the kind of value you can't template copy or recreate with cheap shortcuts. And now I'm free. I'm heard. And I'm the one writing the rules. Chapter 12. The final victory. Not revenge, but rising above. I used to think revenge was an action, a comeback, a retaliation, a slap in the face of those who tried to keep you down. But now I understand. True revenge is needing no revenge at all. It's becoming so undeniably successful that your very existence is punishment enough for those who once humiliated you. Within just 6 months of leaving Meridian, I helped elevate Cascade Brand Collective to an entirely new level. I didn't do anything extraordinary. I simply stayed true to what they once called unprofessional storytelling. Emotion, culture, human connection. Only this time, no one was there to stop me. I worked directly with brand founders. I visited their homes, shared meals with them, spoke with their grandmothers, read love letters written by their grandfathers during the war. I went far beyond design. I listened to their lives, then turned them into visuals campaigns, the soul of their brands. And the result, Marcus Holloway expanded his brewery into Washington State. Elena Vasquez launched a modern traditional fashion line that sold out in just 3 days. An Asian food brand I helped narrate their 1979 refugee story received $1, $2 million in cultural grants. My name began appearing at industry conferences, not because Lucia once got pushed out, but because Lucia turned storytelling into a true growth strategy. Cascade's revenue grew by 38%. Client retention hit 98%. I began hiring young talents who had once been labeled too emotional or not professional enough, and turned them into powerful brand storytellers. We built a space where emotion was strength, where empathy was currency, where no one was told to keep distance from clients, but encouraged to get closer, more real, more human. And Bethany I never asked. The news found me. After leaving Meridian during the so-called internal restructuring, she applied to the top 3 agencies in Portland. All 3 rejected her. Not because there were no roles, but because her reputation arrived before her resume. The woman who deleted her employees' work in a public meeting and lost all the company's major clients 1 month later. A creative director who couldn't answer basic questions about her own clients' brands. A person who once declared storytelling useless, now applying in a market that had fully shifted toward brand humanization. Her name began popping up in workshops. Not on the speaker list, but on the management mistakes to avoid slides. Here's a classic example one speaker said. A friend sent me the clip. When power is handed to someone without the skill, and when ego outweighs the humility needed to grow. Don't be a Bethany. She doesn't know, and I don't need her to. I no longer hate her. I have nothing left to prove. I just live and keep succeeding. Every time a small business emails to thank me for understanding their story, every time I get a message that says, "You're the reason I chose design as a career," every time I see a client's eyes fill with tears as their brand is finally told right, I know I've already won, not by shouting, but by letting my silence echo louder than any accusation ever could. Chapter 13. Winning was never about revenge. It was about becoming who I really am sometimes. I still think about the day Bethany clicked that mouse and erased everything I had worked so hard to build. Back then, I thought I had lost everything. I felt humiliated, alone, small standing in front of a system rigged with power and injustice. But in truth, that wasn't the end. It was my rebirth. She didn't destroy my career. She simply freed me from a place that was never worthy of keeping me. If you're listening to this story and you've ever felt like you didn't belong where you worked, if you've been pushed aside because you're too emotional, too deep, or too different, if you've been told clients don't care about your stories, they just want results, then I just want to say this. Don't change who you are just because someone lacks the depth to understand you. Some places only want people who obey, but there are also places waiting for people who listen. Some companies measure your worth by deadlines, but there are brands born from the heart you pour into every design, every word, every conversation over tea. Don't let a Bethany in your life, whether it's a boss, a colleague, or even a loved one, convince you that kindness is weakness, that sensitivity is wrong, that human connection is unprofessional, because the very things they tried to erase from you are the exact reasons you are irreplaceable. And if you ask me what moment of revenge felt most satisfying, it wasn't when I quit in the middle of a meeting. It wasn't when Trevor begged me to come back. It wasn't even when the Don't Be a Bethany slide was shown at industry conferences. It was that quiet moment when I sat among my team watching them laugh, create and connect with clients from the heart, and realized I had helped build a world Bethany never had the depth to understand, and I didn't need to go back to fix the past. I just had to keep moving forward, carrying everything true about who I am. If you've ever been underestimated, called too emotional, or dismissed for valuing people over numbers, please know you are not wrong. You're just standing in the wrong place. Walk away, and you will find a place where people don't erase what you've built, they build on top of it. Higher, deeper, stronger with you. Because genuine kindness will always have a place. And true talent never needs to scream to be heard. If you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever been told you're too much, too emotional, too soft, remember this. What seems too much in the eyes of the wrong people is often just enough to create something extraordinary. And if you've ever been hurt by a Bethany in your life, I hope this story gives you a little faith. You don't need to strike back to get revenge. All you need is to live well and let them witness the consequences for themselves. Thank you for staying with this story until the end. If you've gone through something similar, don't hesitate to leave a comment. Who knows, your words might be exactly what someone else needs today. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell, because Scarlet Vows will always bring you stories that cut deep hurt true and end in a way that's absolutely worth it.